Okay, so we are in the second half of The Sea Devil by Arthur Gordon. Then the sea exploded in his face. In a frenzy of spray, a great horned thing shot like a huge bat out of the water. The man saw the mesh of his net etched against the mottled blackness of its body, and he knew, in the split second in which thought was still possible, that those twin swirls had been made not by two mullet, but by the wingtips of the giant ray of the Gulf Coast, Manta barostris, also known as clamcracker, devil ray, sea devil. The man gave a hoarse cry. He tried to claw the slip knot off his wrist, but there was no time. The quarter-inch line snapped taut. He shot over the side of the cliff as if he had roped a runaway locomotive. He hit the water head first and seemed to bounce once. He plowed a blinding furrow for perhaps 10 yards. Then the line went slack as the sea devil jumped again. It was not the full-grown manta of the deep gulf, but it was close to 9 feet from tip to tip, and it weighed over 1,000 pounds. Up into the air it went, pearl-colored underbelly gleaming as it twisted in a frantic effort to dislodge the clinging thing that had fallen upon it. Up into the starlight, a monstrous survival from the dawn of time. The water was less than 4 feet deep. Sobbing and choking, the man struggled for a foothold on the slimy bottom. Sucking in great gulps of air, he fought to free himself from the rope, but the slip knot was jammed deep into his wrist. He might as well have tried to loosen a circle of steel. The ray came down with a thunderous splash and drove forward again. The flexible net followed every movement, impeding it hardly at all. The man weighed 175 pounds, and he was braced for the shock, and he had the desperate strength that comes from looking into the black eyes of death. It was useless. His arm straightened out with a jerk that seemed to dislocate his shoulder. His feet shot out from under him. His head went under again. Now, at last, he knew how the fish must feel when the line tightens and drags him toward the alien element that is his doom. Now he knew. Desperately, he dug the fingers of his free hand into the ooze, felt them dredge a futile channel through broken shells and the ribbon-like seagrasses. He tried to raise his head, but could not get it clear. Torrents of spray choked him as the ray plunged toward deep water. His eyes were of no use to him in the foam-streaked blackness. He closed them tight, and at once an insane sequence of pictures flashed through his mind. His life is flashing before his eyes. He saw his wife sitting in their living room, reading, waiting calmly for his return. He saw the mullet he had just caught, gasping its life away on the floorboards of the skiff. He saw the cigarette he had flung from the sea wall, touch the water and expire with a tiny hiss. He saw all these things and many others simultaneously in his mind as his body fought silently and tenaciously for its existence. His hand touched something hard and closed on it in a death grip, but it was only the sharp-edged helmet of a horseshoe crab, and after an instant, he let it go. He had been under the water perhaps 15 seconds now, and something in his brain told him quite calmly that he could last another 40 or 50, and then the red flashes behind his eyes would merge into darkness, and the water would pour into his lungs in one sharp, painful shock, and he would be finished. Okay, at this point, what I'd like to do is to take just a moment inside this video to kind of see how long you can hold your breath. See if during the time that I do the countdown, if you can hold your breath. And he said it was about 40 or 50 seconds total. And so let's see if you can do that. So let's start right now. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. 25 seconds. 30 seconds. 35 seconds. 40 seconds right then. So who all was able to hold it? This thought spurred him to a desperate effort. He reached up and caught his pinioned wrist with his free hand. He doubled up his knees to create more drag. He thrashed his body madly like a fighting fish from side to side. This did not disturb the ray, but now one of the great wings tore through the mesh, and the net slipped lower over the fins, projecting like horns from below the nightmare head, and the sea devil jumped again. And once more, the man was able to get his feet on the bottom and his head above water, and he saw ahead of him the pair of ancient stakes that marked the approach to the channel. He knew that if he was dragged much beyond those stakes, he would be in 8 feet of water, and the ray would go down to hug the bottom, as rays always do, and then no power on earth could save him. So in the moment of respite that he was granted him, he flung himself toward them. For a moment, he thought his captor yielded a bit. Then the ray moved off again, but more slowly now, and for a few yards the man was able to keep his feet on the bottom. Twice he hurled himself back against the rope with all his strength, hoping that something would break, but nothing broke. The mesh of the net was ripped and torn, but the draw lines were strong, and the stout perimeter cord threaded through the sinkers was even stronger. So we're sitting here wondering if he's going to be set free. What's that called? Answer the question. The man could feel nothing now in his trapped hand. It was numb, but the ray could feel the powerful lunges of the unknown thing that was trying to restrain it. It drove its great wings against the unyielding water and forged ahead, dragging the man and pushing a sullen wave in front of it. The man had swung as far as he could toward the stakes. He plunged toward one and missed it by inches. His feet slipped, and he went down on his knees. Then the ray swerved sharply, and the second stake came right at him. He reached out with his free hand and caught it. So I'm going to use this yardstick as the stake. And he caught it. He caught it just above the surface, 6 or 8 inches below the high water mark. He felt the razor-sharp barnacles bite into his hand, collapse under the pressure, drive their tiny slime-covered shell splinters deep into his flesh. He felt the pain, and he welcomed it. And he made his fingers into an iron claw that would hold until the tendons were severed or the skin was shredded from the bone. The ray felt the pressure increase with a jerk that stopped it dead in the water. For a moment, all was still as the tremendous forces came into equilibrium. The net slipped again, and the perimeter cord came down over the sea devil's eyes, blinding it momentarily. The great ray settled to the bottom and braced its wings against the mud and hurled itself forward and upward. The stake was only a 4x4 of crested pine. Let's pretend this is the stake. And it was old. 10,000 tides had swirled around it. Worms had bored it. Parasites had clung. Under the crust of barnacles, it still had some heart left, but not enough. The man's grip was 5 feet above the floor of the bay. The leverage was too great. See how this is bending like that? It's going to break off, just like it does here. The stake snapped off at its base. The ray lunged forward, dragging the man in the useless timber. The man had his lungs full of air, but when the stake snapped, he thought of expelling the air and inhaling the waters as to have it finish quickly. He thought of this, but he did not do it. And then, just at the channel's edge, the ray met the porpoise coming in. The porpoise had fed well this night and was in no hurry. But it was a methodical creature, and it intended to make a sweep around the old dock before the tide dropped too low. It had no quarrel with any ray, but it feared no fish in the sea, and when the great black shadow came rushing blindly and unavoidably, it rolled fast and struck once with its massive horizontal tail. The blow descended on the ray's flat body with a sound like a pistol shot. It would have broken a buffalo's back, and even the sea devil was half stunned. It veered wildly and turned back toward the shallow water. It passed within 10 feet of the man, face down in the water. It slowed and almost stopped, wingtips moving faintly, gathering strength for another rush. The man had heard the tremendous slap of the great mammal's tail and the snorting gasp as it plunged away. He felt the line go slack again, and he raised his dripping face and he reached for the bottom with his feet, and he found it. But now the water was up to his neck. He plucked at the noose once more with his lacerated hand, but there was no strength in his fingers. He felt the tension come back into the line as the ray began to move, and for half a second he was tempted to throw himself backward and fight as he had been doing, pitting his strength against the vastly superior strength of the brute. But the acceptance of imminent death had done something to his brain. It had driven out the fear, and with the fear had gone the panic. He could think now, and he knew with absolute certainty that if he was to make any use of this last chance that had been given him, it would have to be based on the one faculty that had carried man to his preeminence above all beasts, the faculty of reason. Only by using his brain could he possibly survive, and his brain responded. It offered him one. He did not know whether his body still had the strength to carry out the brain's commands, but he began to swim forward toward the ray that was still moving hesitantly away from the channel. He swam forward, feeling the rope go slack as he gained on the creature. Ahead of him, he saw the one remaining stake, and he made himself swim faster until he was parallel with the ray, and the rope trailed behind both of them in a deep U. He swam with a surge of desperate energy that came from nowhere, so that he was slightly in the lead as they came to the stake. He passed on one side of it. The ray was on the other. Then the man took one last deep breath, and he went down under the black water until he was sitting on the bottom of the bay. He put one foot over the line so that it passed under his bent knee. He drove both his heels into the mud, and he clutched the slimy grass with his bleeding hand, and he waited for the tension to come again. The ray passed on the other side of the stake, moving faster now. The rope grew taut again, and it began to drag the man back toward the stake. He held his prisoned wrist close to the bottom under his knee, and he prayed that the stake would not break. He felt the rope vibrate as the barnacles bit into it. He did not know whether the rope would crush the barnacles or whether the barnacles would cut the rope. All he knew was that in 5 seconds or less, he would be dragged into the stake and cut to ribbons if he had tried to hold on, or drowned if he didn't. He felt himself sliding slowly and then faster, and suddenly the ray made a great leap forward, and the rope burned around the base of the stake, and the man's foot hit it hard. He kicked himself backward with his remaining strength, and the rope parted, and he was free. He came slowly to the surface. 30 feet away, the sea devil made one last tremendous leap and disappeared into the darkness. The man raised his wrist and looked at the frayed end of the rope, which would be from here to here, which is not very far. I'll back up just a little bit. That is how far he was from death. 20 inches, perhaps. He lifted his other hand and felt the hot blood start instantly, but he didn't care. He put his hand on the stake above the barnacles and held on to the good, rough, honest wood. He heard a strange noise and realized that it was himself sobbing. High above, there was a droning sound, and looking up, he saw the nightly plane from New Orleans inbound from Tampa. Calm and serene, it sailed, symbol of man's proud mastery over nature. Its lights winked green and red for a moment, then it was gone. Slowly, painfully, the man began to move through the placid water. He came to the skiff at last and climbed into it. The mullet, still alive, can you believe that's still alive? Slapped convulsively with its tail. The man reached down with his torn hand, picked up the mullet, let it go. He began to work on the slip knot doggedly with his teeth. His mind was almost a blank, but not quite. He knew one thing. He knew he would do no more casting alone at night. Not in the dark of the moon. No, not he. That's it. The end.